This is note taker 25 on worms and mollusks. With our worms, we are going to talk about 3 different phyla, and these phyla are categorized by their body shapes. We're going to talk about flatworms, roundworms, and segmented worms. Regardless of the phylum of worms, all of our worms will have bilateral symmetry. That means if you were to draw a line down the center of the worm's body, the left and right sides would be mirror images of each other. Our first worm phyla are going to be our flatworms, and they are going to belong to phylum Platyhelminthes. And this, if you break this word down in our word wall in class, it actually means flat worm. And these worms are going to have flattened bodies. They're actually going to look like little ribbons. One type of flatworm that exists is called the planarian. They actually live in freshwater and ponds or streams, and they like to live on the underside of rocks or plants because that's where they like to hide, so that larger fish don't eat them. And the planarians will feed off of dead plants or animal matter. Now with our planarians, there is one body opening. They have one feeding tube that comes out, and they will feed off of the dead vegetation, the plants and the animal matter. And then when they have waste products, those waste products will be expelled out that same opening. What is neat about our planarian is we're getting into animals now that have the ability to regrow body parts through a process called regeneration. And planaria are so successful at this when times when food is not available to them, they will actually start to digest their own body parts. And then when food becomes plentiful again, they will regrow. Planaria are often used in high school biology courses, to show you this regeneration, where they will actually take the planaria, allow the student to cut it in half, and then each half will grow a new half. And you're going to see part of this on the next slide. These are all pictures of planaria. The one in the top center, where you can see the white structure in the center of its body, that is actually the feeding tube that comes out of its body when it is feeding. The bottom center picture shows you the color of planaria, how they can kind of blend in with the rock that they're up against. But the one I really want you to look at is the picture on the right. You can see here that 3 of the worms actually have 2 heads, and the one worm has 2 little heads and 2 little tails. With a planaria, if you don't cut it all the way down the center, you can actually cut it just the head portion in half, and each head will grow a new half. If you cut the tail region, each tail will grow a new half. You can actually cut it in half across its body, not head to tail, but actually left to right across its body. The head will grow a new tail, the tail will grow a new head. So planaria are extremely successful with regeneration because they are such a simple worm. Some of our flatworms are actually parasitic. And you know, we've talked about parasites already this year and how parasites are not good for you. They're actually going to bring some harm or could even be deadly to you. A tapeworm is an example of a flatworm that is a parasite. It looks like an extremely long flat ribbon that's in sections. And what makes tapeworms so bad is they can get up to meters long. They will get into your intestines. And what a tapeworm does is it's going to make you sick because as your body is digesting food, the tapeworm is absorbing the nutrients from that before you can. So it's actually starving you because it's stealing the nutrients from your food. Another problem that tapeworms can cause is that if you get too many tapeworms, or if a tapeworm gets knotted up inside of you, it can actually cause a blockage in your intestines. And then, if you have a blockage, your waste products can't leave your body and can actually make you extremely sick, and could poison and kill you if you don't get it. taken care of. And one other thing that is so bad about tapeworms is that tapeworms, each one of those segments on its body, have both male and female reproductive parts. So it can release both egg and sperm, so we can have fertilized eggs that are passing through your body. A lot of them will pass out through your waste products and be passed on if other things are around that waste. The second group of worms we're going to talk about are the phylum Nematoda, which actually means thread-like. These are going to be our roundworms. And the best way to describe what a roundworm looks like, it looks like a cooked piece of spaghetti with pointed ends on it. Now, your roundworms can live inland or on land or in the water, and a lot of them are going to be animal parasites, and those are going to be the ones I'm going to concentrate on. One of the roundworms, called Trichinella, actually lives in the muscles of pigs, and if you eat undercooked or raw pork, sometimes you can get that worm inside of you. And it's going to burrow into your tissues, like your arm tissue, your leg tissue, and it's going to cause you excruciating pain. Another type, called hookworms, is actually going to burrow into your body through the soft skin between your toes. You're not going to feel it because the larva is so tiny. It's not going to trigger any of your nerves when it's going in. They are, however, going to make their way to your intestines, where they will hook themselves on to the inside of your intestines, and they will cause you to bleed a little bit, and they're going to feed off of that blood. Your roundworms are going to have almost what we would call our first digestive system, although it's not going to be a true one because it's not going to have a stomach, intestines, anything like that. But they're going to have a tube-like digestive system similar to us, to where they have two openings. They have a mouth at one end and an anus at the other, and then there's a tube that connects them. So as food passes through the body, nutrients will be absorbed through this tube into their body, and then whatever's not absorbed leaves through the anus. The top picture is a picture of a bunch of roundworms, and the picture on the bottom left shows a person with a parasitic roundworm that causes a disease called elephantiasis. And what happens is the worm gets into our lymphatic system, which is part of your immune system, which keeps us healthy, and it blocks up the lymphatic passageways so that fluid gets trapped and your leg starts to swell, or if you have it in your leg, that area will start to swell, and it does disfigure the skin on the outside. The bad thing about this is even if you were to take medication to kill the worms, the damage in your leg to your tissues and your skin is already done. So you may get a little reduction in swelling, but it's not ever going to it's not going to go away totally. If you've ever heard of heartworms in your pets, heartworms are another example of a roundworm that affects us. Our last group of worms is going to be phylum Annelida. These are going to be our annelids. These are going to be our segmented worms. Your earthworm and your leech are going to be examples of your segmented worms. Now, segmented worms, they can live in salt water, they can live in fresh water, or they can live on land. One thing they all need, however, all segmented worms are going to need a moist environment to survive. The picture on the left is an example of an earthworm, and the picture on the right is going to be an example of a leech. Now, with earthworms, they are going to have a slimy outer layer that is going to have mucus, and that mucus is going to serve two purposes for the worm. The first purpose we're going to talk about here at the top, and that's going to be to help it glide through the soil. In addition to help it moving through the soil, along with the mucus, on the bottom of the worm there are tiny little bristles called setae, and these are going to help it pull itself along the ground. These setae act sort of like a football player or a soccer player's cleats. It helps them get a good hold on the ground so that they can push themselves forward. Earthworms do have a closed circulatory system, which means they do have a tube for the blood to pass through in their body. And earthworms do not have any type of special respiratory organs. Actually, oxygen enters the skin and carbon dioxide leaves through the skin through the process of diffusion. Now, for this to happen, the earthworm must stay moist. So this is the second job of the mucus. The mucus allows the skin of the earthworm to stay moist so that oxygen and carbon dioxide can move across. If an earthworm dries out, it will suffocate and die. And we see that that's a huge problem a lot of times when it's raining. It's too wet in the ground for them, so they come up to the surface, they get on the sidewalks, they get on the parking lots, and then in the summer, our storms are over very quickly, the rain dries up, the sun comes out, and a lot of them get trapped there, they dry out, and they actually suffocate and die. Our sixth animal phyla is going to be phylum Mollusca. Mollusca means soft-bodied. So these are going to be soft-bodied animals, and they're going to typically have an inner or outer shell. So examples of your mollusk are going to be clams, oysters, scallops, mussels, octopus, squid, snails, and slugs. Most of your mollusks are going to have a thick muscular foot, sort of like the clam does, and what that's going to do is it's going to help open and close its shell, it's going to help the mollusks move around, or, like your clams, will help them dig and bury themselves in the sand. The head region of your mollusk is usually going to consist of a mouth and may have sensory organs such as eyes. These you're going to find more in your octopi and your squid. And then all of them will have a soft mantle that covers the mollusk body, and if they have a shell, the mantle will also secrete the chemical that makes the shell. So we're going to break them into three classes. So when we talk about classification, we have domain, we break domains into kingdoms, kingdom into phyla, phyla into classes. So our three groups are going to be our snails and slugs and their relatives. The second group is going to be mollusks that have two shells. And then our last group of mollusks will be our tentacled mollusks. Snails, slugs, and their relatives are going to belong to the class Gastropoda. Gastro means stomach, pod means foot, and you can find these words on our word wall in the classroom. And so our gastropods, their foot is found on the same side of the body as the stomach. That's what that means. And a good way to remember it is it looks like they're crawling around on their stomach. So if you think of a snail and a slug, it looks like they're crawling around on the ground on their stomach. We can have some gastropods that live in the ocean or the freshwater, or we have them that live on land. But like our earthworms, they must have a moist environment to survive. Gastropods are actually going to have a special feature in their mouth called a radula, and it's going to be a tongue-shaped organ, and it looks like a file, like you would scrape down, like help to sand something down. And what they do is they eat plant material, so this radula is used to kind of file off or scrape off bits of plant matter so that they'll be an easier size so they can be swallowed down. The picture at the top here is a picture of a snail's mouth, and you can see the rough part inside, that is the radula. The snail is going to be a single-shelled mollusk, so one shell on its back, and the slug is going to have no shell. Both of them are going to leave a trail of mucus behind that helps them glide across the different surfaces. It also, like the earthworm, keeps them moist so that they can have oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. Your sea slugs, which I'm going to have a picture of on the next slide, are going to be kind of a cousin of our land snails and land slugs. And a lot of them are going to actually have chemicals that taste bad, because a lot of them fish will try to eat, but they'll release this chemical to show that they taste bad, and a lot of times the fish will spit them out. Here in these pictures, top left is your snail, bottom left is your slug, and your right side is going to be your sea slug. And a lot of times your sea slugs will come in these bright colors as a warning to say, leave me alone, I don't taste good. The next group we're going to talk about are two-shelled mollusks, and they're going to belong to class Bivalvia, which means two valves. And members of this group are going to be your clams, your scallops, your mussels, your oysters. Your bivalves are going to have two shells held together by very powerful muscles. When they are living and they close, they don't want you in there, and they're strong enough to keep you out. Now, although most of them will stay in one place, a few of them, like your clams, can move together by clapping their shells together. If any of you have ever seen the SpongeBob episode with the baby scallop and it looks like it's kind of flying through the water, that's exactly how these guys will move. They will open their shells, pulling in water, and when they clap their shells closed, it pushes the water out and forces the clam to swim backwards. Your bivalves are all going to be filter feeders, which means that they have a valve which water will pass in. That water will be carrying food particles and oxygen. It will pass over the structures of their body. The mouth part will filter out little pieces of food, while the gill that is inside of the clams and oysters will actually filter out the oxygen for them. The picture on the top is a hand-drawn picture of a clam. You can see that off to the right side there are two siphons. One has arrows pointing in and one has an arrow pointing out. The one with the arrows pointing in will bring water into the clam. The water will pass over the feathery gill, which is lying right on top. That will pull out the oxygen. Then the water will pass underneath to the mouth region, which will pull out the food, and any waste products will leave the other siphon, the out siphon, with the out arrow. This picture also shows you the muscular foot that the clam will use kind of as a shovel to bury himself under the sand. The bottom picture is a picture of a giant clam. These can get quite large. The picture definitely does not do it justice. The mantle of your bivalves actually contains a gland that will give off a material that hardens into a shell. Now, with these guys, they also can get a foreign object inside, like a grain of sand. And if you have ever been to the beach and gotten a piece of sand in your eye, you know how uncomfortable it is. Well, when the sand gets stuck between the mantle and the shell of a bivalve, the glands are also going to secrete material to cover that foreign object, that grain of sand. And it will keep on secreting, and year after year, that little grain of sand becomes completely covered with secretions and gets larger and larger and becomes a pearl. And you can see the examples of pearls in the pictures below. You can see that some of them are cream colored. You can have multiples in there. Others, you might just have one pearl forming inside, and it'll be a pretty white color. Our last group of mollusks are going to be our tentacled mollusks. They're going to belong to the class Cephalopoda. Cephalo means head, pod means foot. So these guys are going to look like they're a head with feet attached to them, which the feet would be the tentacles. This is going to be your octopus, your squid, and your chambered nautilus. Most of your cephalopods, like your octopus and your squid, do not have an outer shell. However, they do have a structure inside the head portion for the squid to give it some stability. The chambered nautilus, however, and you're going to see a picture on the next slide, is a cephalopod that has an outer shell. All our cephalopods will have tentacles that they're going to use to move themselves through the water, also to capture food. If you were to look for the mouth of these guys, it's going to be in the middle of all the tentacles. And depending on the cephalopod will determine how many tentacles it's going to have. Your octopus will have 8 tentacles, your squid will have 10. It'll have 8 similar to the octopus, but then it's going to have 2 longer ones that it uses to grab food with. The top left picture is an octopus, the top right picture is a chambered nautilus, and the bottom picture is a baby squid. And we're going to see some videos in class that show you how these guys move around, and also we'll talk about what great escape artists our octopus can be. Now, even though they don't have an outer shell for protection, some of your cephalopods do have the ability to produce a dark ink cloud when they are scared, and this ink cloud, if you're a fish chasing the squid to eat it, and all of a sudden there's ink cloud in the water, it startles you as the fish, and the couple of seconds that it takes you to pause to get your bearings and determine where you are, that's enough time for the squid to make its getaway run. Here is a hand-drawn picture of a squid that it shows you how 2 of the tentacles are longer than others, and those are going to be the 2 that are used to reach out and grab their prey for food. This is the end of a note taker. Please do not forget to complete the assessment that follows.